In the structure of Parshas Vayeshev, there is a difficulty. There is an interruption in the story of Yosef. At the point of the story that Yosef is sold and he is in transit to Mitzrayim, the Torah interrupts with the story of Yehuda, who separated himself from his brothers, and he got married, had children. The entire story of Yehuda and Tamar, the birth of his children, Peretz and Zorach, and then the Torah resumes the story of Yosef. And the question is that what is the function of this interruption? It seems to be not relevant to the main theme of the parsha. At first glance, we'd be tempted to say that this parsha is to demonstrate the righteousness of Yosef. It says in the beginning of the parsha that the entire problem with the brothers began because Vayava Yosef es dibasum ra el aviyah, that he brought lashon hara, he brought evil reports to Yaakov. So what were the evil reports? Rashi says that there were chashudim al ha'arayas. They were suspect in arayas. So we would think that this was unjustified, that Yosef made this accusation up out of thin air, and therefore Yosef was being punished for his chet by being sold to Mitzrayim. So the Torah tells us no, that Yosef was justified. You see that Yehuda, the Gadol Shebahem, the greatest of the brothers, was nichshal in arayas, in the story with Tamar. So probably Yosef had justification for his report, and therefore we should assume that Yosef's being sold was not chas v'shalom, a punishment for a chet, but rather was, as Chazal say, it was me'etz amuka shel oisai tzaddik hakaber b'chebron. This was in order to bring about the fulfillment of the bris that was made between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Avraham Avinu, that Klal Yisrael would be in Golus and Mitzrayim. So therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought it about this way, but not that Yosef was being punished for something that he had done. The only problem is that Chazal don't understand that way. Chazal don't understand that Yehuda's actions with Tamar were a michshel in arayas. And the pasuk says that when Yehuda encountered Tamar, the Medrash says that a malach hamamun ala taiva, the malach who is in charge of desire, pushed Yehuda into this. Meaning he was compelled to engage in this act by a force that he could not humanly overcome. That means that Yehuda was totally innocent in the area of arayas. So this story does not justify Yosef's evil report. So we're back to square one. What is the function of this story? What is this story doing here in the middle of the account of Yosef? I'd like to share with you a very, very interesting thing that Rav Tzadok HaKayin writes in the Sefer Machshavas Charutz about the descent of Yosef to Mitzrayim. He brings a Maimer Chazal. He says it's a known Maimer Chazal. I don't know the source of it. But it says, Yedua Mashomru Chazal. It's a known thing that Chazal say. Me'olam lo sarfu umas ha'olam ha'torah ad shehem sarfu tchila. That the nations of the world, the Goyim, never burnt the Sefer Torah until the Jews burnt one first. V'lo timu ha'migdash ad shehem timu tchila. And the Gentiles never defiled the Beis HaMikdash until the Jews defiled it first. And he writes, V'chein likewise, Kol kitrug hu bo al yidei b'nei Yisrael atzman. If there's ever an accusation made against Jews by the Umas Ha'olam, the kitrug was first made by the Jews themselves. The lule kain, if not for that, ein pel mekatreg lekatreg. The critics would not have a mouth. They couldn't open their mouths. Until the Jews criticized themselves, the outsiders can't criticize us. So it all begins from within. So he writes like this. Here, there was an exchange of accusations. The Shvatim accused Yosef of putting on airs. Hamalech timlech aleinu. Well, you're going to be our king? Who do you think you are? You're putting yourself over us? So that was the accusation the brothers made of Yosef. Yosef made an accusation against them that they were nichshel on arayos. So Yehuda ultimately says, we have to sell Yosef as an eved. So what was Yehuda's kavanah? Why did Yehuda think that selling Yosef as an eved was a good idea? Because Yehuda made the accusation that Yosef was putting on airs. He's too haughty. So when you want to humble somebody, how do you make the person humble? You sell him as a slave. So Yehuda thought that selling him as a slave was not simply a way of getting Yosef out of the way, but it would be a tikkun. It would rectify Yosef's underlying flaws. Underlying flaws, geus, is gaiva, it's pride. So we'll take him down a notch, sell him as a slave, and that'll be a tikkun. But says Reb Tzadok, but that wasn't the real reason why Yosef had to go down to Mitzrayim. The real reason he had to go down was because since Yosef made an accusation against his brothers that they were nichshel and arayos, so Yosef had to be tested in the area of arayos, because when you accuse others, you bring the kitrug, you bring the accusation on yourself, as he says according to Chazal. There's never a kitrug on Jews until Jews themselves are makatreg. So when Yosef made the accusation against the brothers that they were nichshel and arayos, Yosef had to be tested just in that. And that's the real reason Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, to be tested with Eishes Peitifar, to see whether he would be innocent in the area of arayos. So it's a fantastic thing Reb Tzadok says, that Yehuda thought they were selling Yosef because they accused him of being haughty, so we'll sell him as a slave and that will bring him down. But in reality, that wasn't the case. The reason he had to be sold was because since Yosef made an accusation against the brothers that they were nichshel ba'arayos, therefore it was necessary for Yosef to be tested just in that area of arayos. And that's really why he went down to Mitzrayim, not to be a slave. He went down to be tested in the area of Gilui Arayos to clarify that he was innocent of the accusation he made against his brothers. That's what Rabbi Tzadok says. Very, very interesting, intriguing idea. So I'd like to take the idea a step farther. In the same way that since Yosef made an accusation against the brothers that they were nichshel and arayos, Yosef had to be tested. Likewise, because Yehuda made an accusation against Yosef that he's haughty, Yehuda had to be tested. This test, this story with Tamar, was not a test in the area of arayos. As the Medrash says, he was forced into it. The Malach, Hamamuna ala Taiva, the angel that was in charge of Taiva, compelled him. He couldn't resist. He couldn't overcome this. But what was the real Nisayan? The Nisayan was that later on, when Tamar was in fact pregnant, and they came and reported, your daughter-in-law is pregnant, and Yehuda said, take her out to be burnt. And Tamar, of course, didn't reveal that Yehuda was the father. She said that the owner of these objects, the chesemas, the psilim, the mata, that Yehuda had deposited with her, this is the father of the child. And at that point, Yehuda was faced with a tremendous nisayon. He could keep his mouth shut, and Tamar would be executed, and he'd be spared the embarrassment. Or he could humiliate himself and say that he was the father of the child. So really, what was the nisayon of Yehuda? It wasn't the nisayon in arayos. As we said, in terms of arayos, there was nothing Yehuda could have done. But the Malach HaMamun ala Taiva forced him. This was a nisayon in pride. Would he swallow his pride and confess, or for the sake of his pride would he cover up? So why was he tested in this area? Because that's the accusation he made against Yosef. He says Yosef is haughty. You're going to be our king. So therefore, you're making an accusation, you have to be tested. How's your humility doing? And that was the Nisayon of Yehuda. And of course, Yehuda passed with flying colors. He confessed. He said, Tzadka, mimeni, I'm the father of the child, ultimately children. He totally humiliated himself. But that was his test. That was his Nisayon. And according to Chazal, that Nisayon of Yehuda was really greater than the Nisayon of Yosef. Interestingly. The Gemara says in Masechah Seit in Daf Yud that Yosef, Shekiddush Shem Shemayim B'Seiser, the Kiddush Hashem that Yosef made, it was in secret, no one knew. So therefore, they added a letter of Hashem's name to Yosef. In Tehillim, there's a hey added, Eidos B'Hosef Somo. There's an extra hey, it's one of the letters of the divine name, is added to Yosef's name. But Yehuda, who was Makadosh Shem Shemayim B'Goloi, he was Makadosh Shem Shemayim openly by declaring that he was the father of the children. So therefore, his entire name contains the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. The name Yehuda is the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei with an extra dalet added in the middle. So the Gemara seems to say that the Kiddush Hashem of Yehuda was greater than the Kiddush Hashem of Yosef. He was the greater schar. Now, sometimes the test of pride is an even greater test than the test of taiva. And this l'chara could be the pshat. That's why the story is put there. Where this story really is the reverse of the story of Yosef. Yosef had to go down to Mitzrayim to be tested to clarify the accusation he made against the brothers that he was innocent. Yehuda had to experience what he experienced to show that the accusation he made against Yosef, he himself also was innocent. Let's go a little further on this subject. Let's talk about the Nisayon of Yosef for a few moments. And then we'll talk about the Nisayon of Yehuda. We know certain things about Yosef. We know that he was aimed in this tremendous Nisayon of Eishes Peitifar. It's hard for us to imagine what it was. You know, he's a young boy. He's all alone. No one will see. No one will know. The master's wife wants him. She can do all sorts of things, all sorts of threats she can make. According to Chazal, she did make. The Gemara in Yuma says she threatened to poke his eyes out. She threatened to cut off his food. She threatened to have him tied. And on top of that, she tried to seduce him. The Gemara says that every evening she put on a different outfit. Every morning she put on a different outfit. She made herself beautiful. It would have been very easy for Yosef to give in. And Yosef on principle said no. He said that how can I do such a thing? The master entrusted me with everything except you, because you're his wife. How can I do this tremendous evil and sin to God? I'll mention Agav, a very interesting thing. I think I mentioned it before from the Chidush Yerim. That Yosef said, how can I do this great evil and I will sin against God? So what is the sin against God? So Rashi says, because B'nai Noach are mitzvah alo arayas. This was before Matan Torah. Torah wasn't given yet. But why would it be a sin against God? Because B'nai Noach are commanded in arayas. So the question is, well, then it's not just Yosef is commanded. Eishes Peitifar would also be commanded. She's also a Ben Noach, Bas Noach. So what does it mean when he says, how can I do this evil? V'chatasi le'elokim. I would be sinning against Hashem. He should say, V'chatanu le'elokim. We would be sinning against Hashem. If we did this, we'd both be sinners. So what does Yosef mean when he says, V'chatasi? I would be sinning against God. So the Chidush Yerim says an amazing thing. He did not want to put himself and the Eishes Peitifar in the same sentence. He didn't want to say we would do something. Saying we, that itself was a type of intimacy. That we can't do this because we would be sinning if we did this. But saying we, referring to himself and Eishes Peitifar, that's also a type of intimacy that Yosef didn't want. And therefore he wouldn't speak of her and himself in the same word. The Chatasi, I would be sinning against God. An amazing pshat. So we know that Yosef was very, very, very scrupulous and very strong in not being nichshel in arayos. Something else we also know about Yosef. We know that Yosef has dreams that are real dreams, because his dreams have genuine significance. Now the Gemara Bereshis has sugyas to discuss. Sometimes dreams are totally nonsense. Sometimes there's a mixture of valid information and nonsense. Sometimes the dream is totally valid. It depends whether it's Haidei Malach, Haidei Shade, but Yosef has dreams that are very, very accurate. Ultimately, they all come true. And Yosef not only has accurate dreams himself, he's able to interpret dreams accurately. So the question is, are these two aspects of Yosef related? The fact that he is careful in the area of arayos, and that he can interpret dreams and he has true dreams, or are they just unrelated parts of Yosef's being? Now, Tzadok HaKayin writes in the Sefer Tzidkas HaTzadik that the two are connected. And I'd like to explain what he means, but expand upon it. We talk about the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara for arayos especially. What is the nature of the Yetzer Hara for arayos? There's a Gemara in Maseches Sukkah that says that L'Asid Lavo, in Mashiach's time, Hashem is going to slaughter the Yetzer Hara. And when the Yetzer Hara is slaughtered, the tzaddikim will look at the Yetzer Hara, and it will appear to them like a har gadol, like a great mountain. And they'll say, how could we have been expected to overcome this great mountain? And to the Rishoyim, to the wicked, it will look like a chut hasara, it will look like a hair. And they'll say, Heich lo yacholnu, how were we not able to conquer this hair? So the question is, what is it? Is it a mountain or is it a hair? So the Beis Halevi says a very beautiful pshat in Parshas Bereshis. It says like this. He says, we all understand that the nature of the Yetzer Hara is that it creates a fantasy world. An olam hadimyan, a world of illusion. In other words, a person is tempted to do something, and somehow he is convinced that if he does this, he'll be happy, and he'll be slender, and he'll be attractive, and his life will be totally successful, everything will fall into place, and he has it all figured out, and he constructs this fantastic illusion of how beautiful it will be, how wonderful, how gratifying, and so on and so forth. The reality is that when a person succumbs, he realizes, the illusions, the fantasies, were better than the thing itself. It's never as good. As you dream about the delicious meal you're going to have in the exquisite restaurant, and then you go and you eat it, no, it was okay. Nothing special. The tzaddikim who don't give into the Yetzer Hara, so the things that they desired still appear like that big mountain. Because they still have those illusions, they still have those fantasies of how great it's going to be. So they ask themselves, how are we able to overcome this? The Yetzer Hara created such a fantastic image of beauty and pleasure. How can we overcome that? The Rishoyim who gave into the Yetzer Hara, they already discovered that what they wanted really was worthless. So they say, we gave in for this? How is it possible we weren't able to resist that? But they don't have the illusions anymore. The illusions have been shattered. All they have is the actual thing which they've experienced. It says, I violated the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom for that? So to them it seems like a chut hasara. But this is the idea that Beis Halevi says, that we know that the Yetzer Hara really is essentially nothing more than a fantasy, an illusion. It's an image. And by the way, that's how Madison Avenue sells. They sell by creating an image. Nowadays, they don't tell you anything about the product. They just show you glamorous people using it, and you assume if I use the product, I'll also be glamorous, and why not? It's all creating an olam hadimyan. How do you overcome that? There's a person who lives grounded in emes, grounded in truth. That person can overcome the Yetzer Hara. A person who sees things as they truly are, can overcome the Yetzer Hara. Kimeduma in Svarim, it says like this, that when Yosef was faced with this big nisayon of Eishes Peitifar, so the Gemara in Saita says that how did he overcome it? Because Ra Demus Yuknai Shalaviv. He saw the image of his father. And when he saw the image of his father looking over his shoulder, he desisted. So the question is, what is special about the Musyuk Mashalaviv? What is special about the image of Yaakov Avinu? Because we know the Mekubalim tell us the meat of Yaakov Avinu is the meat of emes, the meat of truth. So when Yosef reflected on the meat of his father, which is the meat of emes, he understood, he saw things exactly as they were. So there was no fantasy, no illusion, no deception. He saw it for what it was, and he realized that it's not worth it. That's how we overcame this tremendous Yetzer Hara. There is the ability to overcome the Yetzer Hara is to live in reality, not to live in fantasy, not to live in a world of illusion. If you can see things as they truly are, Rav Dessler calls it the Mabot HaEmes, the vision of truth, to see things accurately, then you'll go a long way in overcoming the temptations of the Yetzer Hara. You won't construct these fantasy worlds which are so enticing. The truth is that this also has a connection to dreams. We've said in the past, the line of the Archas Tzadikim, the Archas Tzadikim says that a person who always tells the truth, his dreams will also be true. Because a person who lives in truth, his mind doesn't create fantasies. He's not accustomed to that. What he thinks about is true. You know, some of us live in fantasy worlds. You know, as we dream, what will it be like if we win the lottery? You know, 50 million, I'll spend this, I'll buy this, I'll do this. And it's very comforting, you know. It feels good to even think about these types of things. It says, but a person who lives 100% grounded in truth doesn't think about the fantasies and what if and what would it be like if I won the lottery and so on and so forth. He only thinks about things that are real, right? And therefore, even his dreams are real. But not only that, not only are his dreams real, he's also able to separate the wheat from the chaff when he analyzes someone else's dream. Because he understands what is a function of reality and what is a function of illusion. What is just a function of the daydreaming that the person engages in, and what really is a function of MS. And therefore, being able to sort the one from the other, he can give valid interpretations because he weeds out the irrelevant information and he focuses only on the relevant information. So these two aspects are very, very closely related. But it's not 100%. There's another Yetzer Hara that comes and attacks even the person who is totally grounded in emes. Let me show you a very interesting Gemara in Perek Chelek. The Gemara in Perek Chelek says that David HaMelech asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu a question. He said, why is it that we say in Shmoneh Esrei, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, and we don't say Elokei David? Why don't we say Elokei David? So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, well, the Avos were tested. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov were tested. You were never tested. That's why we don't invoke your name in the Shmoneh Esrei. So David HaMelech says, no, B'choneinu Novan Aseini, test me, I'll pass the test, and I'll also be included in the Shmoneh Esrei. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a test, and I'm going to do you a favor. I'll even tell you what the test will be. The test will be in Inyonei Arayos. That will be your test. So David HaMelech took precautions, and he switched his whole schedule around. He said he knows that really the great time of temptation, right, is nighttime. So I want to be 100% alert. So therefore he slept all day, he stayed up all night, and this way he'd be alert. And one day he was standing on his roof, and the Satan wanted him to be nichshal, that he should stumble to see this woman Vayeshev who was bathing on the roof. But there was a partition, so how is the Satan going to get David to see that? So Idmilei Kitzipor, the Satan made himself like a bird, and David HaMelech decided to shoot the bird. He took a bow and arrow and he shot the bird, and he knocked on the partition, and lo and behold, he saw Vayeshev there, and he was nichshal in this nisayon. So the Gemara says that David HaMelech told HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Golei v'yadua lefanecha, right? Really, it's a known thing that I could have overcome the nisayon. But the reason I didn't overcome it is that it shouldn't be said avda natzach lamare, that the servant got the better of the master. Very perplexing in Gemara. I could have conquered it, but I didn't. That it shouldn't be said that the servant conquered the master. It sounds like this. Rabbi Eliezer writes in Yigeras and Musar that there are two types of Yetzer Hara. There is the natural Yetzer Hara, which means the natural desires that a person has for comfort, for pleasure, etc. And then there's another Yetzer Hara, which is a spiritual force, like a malach, which compels people to do evil, even the types of evil they normally would have no desire for. And Rabbi Eliezer writes, sometimes you see people, they do averis, that they can't have a desire for these things. The things themselves are so repulsive. Why would anyone want to do them? It's just because there's a spiritual force, a satan, if you will, that is forcing them to do it. Now the Gemara says in Maseches Avodah Zarah, the Lohaya David Roy Laisa, that really David should not have succumbed to the temptation by the Chet of Vayeshev. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, David Melech says about himself, Libi cholol bekirbi, that my heart was empty. David HaMelech had already killed his Yetzer Hara. David HaMelech did not have the natural Yetzer Hara. The desire for pleasure, for fun, for comfort, he eliminated that already. Libi cholol bekirbi. But he was in danger of the other type of Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara, which is a spiritual force, which is like a malach, that forces a person to do things that he really wouldn't have desire for, that he was susceptible to. The idea being, again, that David HaMelech already passed the test of Dimyan. He no longer created fantasies. He no longer created illusions. He saw things as they were, and Arias, especially the Chet of Eishesish, was something that he would have had no natural desire for. But there could be an external Yetzer Hara, a spiritual force. Like the Gemara says, there was a Satan that appeared like a bird. Now, the Yetzer Hara over here was not an internal force, a desire for pleasure or whatever. It was a totally external force. There was a Satan that appeared like a bird in order to machshel David. That David was susceptible to. And why was he susceptible to it? Because when a person is on a very high spiritual level, there's a Satan that wants to bring him down. But it has to get a foothold. If there's some flaw, some slight flaw, that's when the Satan can attack. The flaw of David over here was Gaida, was pride. He came to Bonus and said, listen, says, why don't you say, look, hey, David, that I should also be mentioned in the Shemon Esrei, that the entire Klal Yisrael should invoke my merit. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, well, okay, we'll test you, we'll see. After he failed the test, he told Ribono Shel Olam, you know I could have passed the test, meaning you know that my succumbing to this Yetzer Hara was not the regular succumbing to temptation. It wasn't, I had a taiva, I had a desire, I had a physical need or a psychological need. Libi cholol bekirbi, as the Gemara Avodah Zarah says. My heart is empty. I eliminated the Yetzer Hara. It says this was a spiritual force that you sent. Why? So that I shouldn't take pride that I got the better of the Ribono Shel Olam. Avda natzach lamare. This is a danger. Pride is a great danger. If a person is proud, then he opens himself up to this other Yetzer Hara. That's the mice with Yehuda over here, as we explained. That Yehuda made an accusation against Yosef. That Yosef is putting on airs. and therefore Yehuda had to be tested. So what was sent his way, just like David HaMelech was given that Yetzer Hara of Bathsheba, the Satan who appeared like a bird, Yehuda was also given such a Yetzer Hara. The Malach HaMamun Al HaTaiva pushed him into it. There was a spiritual force that forced him. That is a consequence of Gaiva, and he had to overcome that. How did he overcome that? He overcame that by swallowing his pride and confessing. And maybe we'll go a step further. The Ishbitzer says an amazing thing. That it says that after they sold Yosef, Yehuda decided he had to get married. He had to find a wife. He had to find a wife. Because all of a sudden he has this desire to find a wife. All of a sudden, they sold his brother, and all of a sudden, I got to get married. So he goes and he finds this fellow whose name's Shua, marries his daughter. What's the cheshbon? This is an amazing thing. It says Yehuda fell into tremendous despair after they sold Yosef, and he realized they had made a mistake. He fell in tremendous despair. He felt that his own life was finished. His own life was finished. The only hope, perhaps, could be he'll have children. He'll raise the children. Maybe they'll have a good life. But he felt that his life was as good as over. That was the cheshbon. It's an amazing, amazing thing. You know, a lot of people sometimes fall into this trap. They figure, you know, it's too late for me. I'm not going to be a Kama Talmud Chacham. I'm not going to be an Eved Hashem. Okay, I'll have children. I'll send my children to yeshivas. Maybe they'll make something out of themselves. But for me, it's too late. He says that's what Yehuda fell into. Now, this is a very dangerous thing, you see, because when you try to eliminate pride, the danger is that you fall into shiflus. You fall into lowliness and despair. If I'm a nothing, then my life is worth nothing. And therefore there was a very fine balance you'd have to strike. On the one hand, to understand that he was a worthy person, and therefore what he does makes a difference. On the other hand, not to put on airs. And that correct balance he struck with his admission of guilt. Because the truth is, you could cover up for one of two reasons. You could cover up because you're so proud of yourself, and you could cover up because you realize that what difference does it make? Would I do the right thing or not? Either way, I'm finished. So why even bother to perform an act of Mesiras Nefesh? Yehuda found the right balance and he confessed. But this is the idea that Yehuda, the Yetzer Hara that Yehuda had, was not the conventional Yetzer Hara that others faced, the Yetzer Hara of Dimyan. It was the Yetzer Hara, the spiritual force that comes, like that Satan that was a bird, or the Malach HaMamun Al HaTaiva, and therefore that's not a nisayon of Varayas at all. That's a nisayon of pride, and Yehuda was oimed in that nisayon, and he was zoichan. The Gemara says in Masechah Sukkah that when Mashiach comes in the end of days, there'll be two Mashiachim. There'll be the Mashiach ben Yosef and the Mashiach ben David. The question is, why do we need two Mashiachim? What is the idea of these two saviors? Tzadok HaKohen writes that each of these saviors is going to accomplish great things in the political life of the nation, but it will also do good things in the spiritual life of the nation. It says, Mashiach ben Yosef will be the inspiration for us to overcome the Yetzer Hara, just as Yosef was. The Medrash says in Vayikra, Medrash Rabbah, Vayikra, says that Yosef was the inspiration for all the Bnei Yisrael to be Gedurim Ba'arayas, to fence themselves in for Arayas during the years of the Golus Mitzrayim. Because what does that mean? Now the Gemara says that various people obligated various categories of people. Hillel was Mechayev Eswaniyim, the Gemara says. Right? Hillel was very, very poor, and yet he learned Torah. So no one can say, oh, I'm too poor to learn Torah. I have to work, I have to make money, can't afford. We tell the person, were you as poor as Hillel? Certainly not. And nevertheless, Hillel learned Torah, you could also learn Torah. So Hillel was Mechayev Eswaniyim. The Gemara says, Yosef Mechayev Esrashoyim. Says Yosef is Mechayev the people that have the Yetzer Hara. Right? Did anybody have a Nisayon as big as Yosef? No. And he was Omed in his Nisayon. So anybody that has the Yetzer Hara can look to Yosef and tell himself, well, if he could do it in those extreme circumstances, I can do it as well. That's Yosef is Mechayev Esrashoyim. So the Medrash says that for the years that the Jews were in Mitzrayim, and they were tempted, Mitzrayim, of course, was the Arab Haaretz, and there were constant temptations in the areas of Arayas. What was the inspiration? What kept them in line? They recalled Yosef. They said, Yosef had that big Nisayon here in Mitzrayim, and he was Omed ben Nisayon, so we can also be Omed ben Nisayon. So for the decades and decades and decades that the Jews were in Mitzrayim, what kept them in line? That was Yosef, the memory of Yosef, the recollection of Yosef. So Mashiach's time will be the same thing. In Mashiach's time, Mashiach ben Yosef will be our guide in overcoming the Yetzer Hara. Just as the biblical Yosef had the Mabot HaEmes, he was able to rise above Dimyonis, he rise above fantasy and illusion. So Mashiach ben Yosef will be our teacher, will be our guide. He will teach us how to see things as they are, to resist Madison Avenue, to resist advertising, to resist illusions and fantasies, to live with 2 feet firmly grounded in emes, and thereby avoid succumbing to the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, the same way that Yosef was the inspiration for the Jews in Mitzrayim, Mashiach ben Yosef will be the inspiration in Yosef Mashiach to be able to overcome all the Nisyonos in the area of Taiva. That's the rule of Mashiach ben Yosef. The rule of Mashiach ben David is going to be to overcome the Nisayon of Geus, the Nisayon of pride. So just like David HaMelech has humbled himself, as we saw that as a consequence of the Chet HaBasheva, he was totally humble and low, and he was the master of tshuva, and that's exactly like his forebear Yehuda, who was the same thing, that Yehuda had his michshol in the mice of Tamar, and he confessed, and he humiliated himself, etc. He's going to be our Rebbe, so to speak, in humility, how to be humble before the Ribono Shel Olam. So these 2 big Nisyonos, the Nisayon of Dimyon and Arayas, and the Nisayon of Gaiva, on the other hand, we're going to have 2 great Rebbeim. Right? Mashiach ben Yosef will be the Rebbe in the area of Arayas, and Mashiach ben David will be the Rebbe in the area of Geus. The Tikkun Zayar says, we've quoted it before, it says, Man de notzach hai karva, a person who is victorious in this battle against the Yetzer Hara, Yavin le'brata de malka, they give him the princess in marriage, dot's lusa, that's prayer. Meaning there's a special kayach of tefillah that is given to a person who overcomes the nisayon of the Yetzer Hara. And the question is, what does it mean? What's the connection to overcome the Yetzer Hara? The tefillah, I think the idea is this. We're not talking about the Yetzer Hara of Dimyon. There's no connection between that and tefillah. There's no reason just because you overcome Dimyonis, you should be able to have the ability to daven. It refers to the other Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara of Yehuda, the Yetzer Hara of David HaMelech. That Yetzer Hara which comes as a consequence of Geus, of pride, that spiritual force that compels us to do things that we wouldn't want to do. So if we overcome that through humility, through anava, we have a kayach of tefillah. Because what is the kayach of tefillah? The kayach of tefillah is the ability to face the Ribono Shel Olam and say we are totally dependent on you. It says we have no strength of our own, no ability of our own, we are not self-sufficient in any way, we are totally humble before you, and therefore we beg of you to do and provide our needs. It says that kayach of tefillah, that comes for the person who has the ultimate victory. A person who has a victory not only over the natural Yetzer Hara, but the spiritual Yetzer Hara, which comes as a consequence of Gaiva. So that person, Yavin le'brat the Malka, they give him the princess, and that person is Zeicha to the Kayach of Tefillah. Now, of course, we know it was the case of David HaMelech. That David HaMelech was the author of Tehillim. That all our Tefillahs are based on Tehillim, and many incorporate whole paragraphs of Tehillim. Now, that Kayach of Tefillah, that came from David HaMelech because of this Kayach of humility, which was the Kayach with which he overcame this Yetzer Hara ultimately. So it comes out that the story of Yehuda and Yosef over here is not just the story of two individuals. It's really the story of the groundwork of two Mashiachim, the two great leaders that we're going to have. There's Yosef, who is tested in the area of Dimyonis, of Arayas. He's able to be aimed in that Nisayan, and as a result of that Mabat HaEmes, he's able to have true dreams and interpret dreams because he's grounded totally in truth. And on the other hand, we have Yehuda, whose test is not a test in Arayas, but it's a test in humility. Will he humiliate himself to confess to the truth? And he is the Rebbe that we have in being humble before the Ribono Shel Olam, and that of course gives us the Kayach of Tefillah.